And then there's Twitter's obnoxious policy of deciding, for example, that that COVID-19, that SARS-CoV-2 is inherently, that the scientific consensus that it is a natural virus that emerged from bats is so secure that we can declare anything that doesn't adhere to this consensus as a kind of unforgivable thought, that it will label things.
Or heresy, yeah.
Right. What that does is it tamps down the fact that you've got lots of people who are looking at the facts, even just the basic facts, and saying that doesn't add up. And there's this other hypothesis that does add up, and it doesn't seem like we know enough to know which origin it has.
Yeah.
So,
well, and that's what it's kind of funny. Kind of the gateway drug to censorship in a lot of cases are conspiracy theories. And I take two different approaches to that as being a free speech person who isn't particularly bothered, by this. Is one, even if they're false, conspiracies move the world, and it's important to know what people really think. Full stop. This is my free speech radicalism, and it comes down to something very simple. It's always important to know what people really think. Period. And so, for example, like we would have such a poor understanding of where the anti-Semitism came from before World War II if we didn't understand the Protocols of Zion being this huge, fraud and hit. But understanding like people's paranoia and superstitions, all of this stuff is so incredibly important. But also the other part is there's always a possibility that it could be true. And I mean, given my family had to flee the Soviets, it's just one conspiracy after the other. So this is funny, Brett. This room doesn't think I'm here, so I occasionally have to do this.
Well, maybe you should just take up gesticulating as a more central part of your communication modality.
Oh, I'm actually really tamping it down right now. This is the one that I seem to do for everything, according to my wife. It's an atom or the galaxy or, there's so many things that actually it's like, well, this is going to happen. And it's like,
yeah,
I do it without even realizing it.
It's arguments in 2020.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a certain roundness to that argument.
There is a certain,
that was a favorite law school professor said that one time, trying to be nice. But I thought that was great.
So let me take you back to two things you just said here.
Cool.
One, I want to talk to you about conspiracy theories.
Yes.
Because I feel like we're missing the boat on this one.
Okay, great.
There is a very obvious way to deal with conspiracy theories, and that is not to traffic in them, right? But there's a way to deal with the possibility of true things, and it just so happens that we have the most excellent system you could possibly want for dealing with them, which is science. So I want to be very clear, and I have been very clear with my audience, that theory has a precise meaning. That means it has withstood rigorous tests. There should only ever be one theory at a time, right? That is to say, the theory of natural selection is the theory of natural selection because we have so thoroughly tested it and there is no competitor, right? Before it was tested, it was a hypothesis. And so I would say the responsible way to deal with the conspiracy issue is to say, these are hypotheses. The fact that one advances a hypothesis doesn't mean you even believe it's true, right? You can have all kinds of hypotheses. Our conversation could be taking place in a simulated universe. I don't believe that's true, but I do regard it as a hypothesis, and to the extent that it makes predictions, it's testable. So I think the point is, we have been sold a bill of goods. We've been led into a dangerous territory by thinking in terms of conspiracy theories, when in fact they are hypotheses, they make predictions, and we can treat them exactly as seriously as you would a proposed scientific idea that hasn't been tested or has, given mixed results.
Well, here's why you get in trouble, Brett. Thought experimentation, devil's advocacy are absolutely essential to the production of ideas. And I say this stuff on campus and people are like, what? People have to take the other side of different arguments? I'm like, yeah, actually, ideally, you'd have someone who actually believes the other side of the argument because they're going to know the most arguments for it and they're going to be able to defend it. But if not, someone in your team should pretend that they are willing to throw out these other hypotheses on what actually happened. And I'm seeing a situation on campus where that's been sort of obliquely threatened, and now it's being very directly threatened. We just had a case at St. John's where a professor. Do you know this one, Brett?
I don't think so.
This is a case where a professor was in a history class was talking about the Columbian Exchange. You know, the all the wonderful things that the rest of the world got from Columbus's quote unquote discovering the New World, and of course that includes things as basic as potatoes and tomatoes. Like that alone would have made it an incredibly important exchange. But this is a serious historical question, kind of like for all the horrors that came out of the triangle slavery and all this, and the murder and the exposure to smallpox and all of these horrible things. The question is, was it worth it? Any serious intellectual, any serious student should be able to go, and puzzle through that and be able to come down on his side. But it's treated in this case so much like heresy that the professor was suspended at St. John's, and I think he still is. He was relieved from teaching, and I'm seeing more and more cases because I saw a ton of cases for years where it was professors saying something on Twitter that would get them in trouble. Absolutely a free speech issue, absolutely important, but it's moving closer and closer to the classroom, although you might know something about that.
Well, yes, it does seem to me I encountered something a few years back. I'll see if I can remember what it was. Yeah. But okay, so I totally agree with this. Thought experiment is an essential tool, right? Mm-hmm. And the ability to voice a thought experiment, even an obnoxious thought experiment, right, is part and parcel of how, we do moral philosophy, among other things. I mean, trolley problems, right? If you couldn't talk trolley problems because you're killing innocents, well, then, you're robbed of this important tool for the advancement of ethics. Yep. But, okay, so we... Well, I want to take you back to that second thing before we lose the thread.
Sure.
So you are very skeptical about top-down solutions to our online problem.
I am.
You agree that we are dealing with very dangerous downstream consequences of technologies that we couldn't foresee the hazard as they were invented. So that some sort of precaution, were it possible, might have saved us from that, but maybe no conceivable precaution could have existed. But here's the question. Isn't the solution for online an upgrade to our constitutional protections that have worked so well for speech in other realms?
Mm-hmm. So, what would that look like?
Well, I think it would look like exactly what you have just described, which is a radical commitment to keeping the space open to ideas, including obnoxious ones, because the consequence of trying to shut it down and leaving only respectable ideas is unthinkably terrible on very short timescales.
Yeah. And that's been my and people like David French's argument, that essentially if you're going to start regulating speech, guess what? You have this absolutely brilliant body. And I'm the obnoxious American. My mother's British/Irish. My father grew up in Yugoslavia but is Russian. And you're taught from a pretty early age not to go over there with thinking your values are superior. But I totally break that norm when I go to other countries and talk about First Amendment, because what I explain is, I know you guys think we're nuts, but in this country, practically any country in Europe, you're going after speech because someone finds it offensive. In our country, one of the major differences between us and everybody else is actually relatively small. But it's that we have a bedrock principle that it can never be merely because someone finds it offensive. That doesn't make cultural sense. These norms change from period to period. They're different from economic class to economic class, from nation to nation, from men to women in some cases. So the principles that actually have been thought out by, frankly, some of the best minds in U.S. history. I mean, Oliver Wendell Holmes and Louis Brandeis were no slouches on this stuff. And that it presents this really sensible body of law, and actually philosophy and how you actually deal with speech. And I think that it would be ideal way to regulate speech, to use those standards to regulate speech on the internet. I can't quite bring myself, though, to want to give up the freedom of association and expressive rights that these companies have in the first place. But I do think that if there was a place that actually applied these rules, it would be, and applied them very firmly, it would be a healthier environment for one, even though there'd be some nastiness, of course, to be expected. But the direction that Twitter and Facebook are currently going, I think that it's going to start looking like the absurdities that you see in Europe, and worse. It's going to also involve things, and one of the reasons why nobody wants to even do the thought experimentation, what if this actually was a biological weapon? Well, because of the power, wealth, and influence of China.
Well, that's true. I should say, just point of clarity, that it was a biological weapon is a hypothesis. It makes certain predictions.
I assume that. And the funny thing is, I know people on the interwebs would be like, "Well, he claimed this," and I'm like, "Yeah, no, I totally understood it as a hypothesis."
It's a well, that wasn't the one that. So I personally believe the most robust hypothesis. We don't have a theory of its origin yet. We really don't know, but the most robust hypothesis is a lab leak, but not a weapon.
Yeah.
That this was a virus that had picked up capacities through what's called gain-of-function research and then escaped. Presumably it infected a worker and would have gotten out that way, though that's not the only path. But in any case, these are competing hypotheses, right? I haven't seen any support yet for the bioweapon hypothesis, though it's a hypothesis whether there's any evidence for it or not. The point is,
right,
were it true, it would make certain predictions about the way it behaved.
But, well, the whole time bomb aspect of it, the ability to transmit it asymptomatically and then you get walloped by it, 2 weeks later, that's clever. And that's definitely one of the reasons why I think people think it, sometimes go to it being a weapon, is it's just so perfectly designed to spread.
Well, I would say that's not a prediction, though. That is an observation of its nature, which leads to the hypothesis that it could be a bioweapon, in which case it would have to have other features. But in any case, I guess my only point is it just so happens that we have the most robust system ever devised, I believe the most robust system possible for figuring out what's true, and it's already the bedrock of Western civilization. Why do we exclude conspiracies from its application? Why do we leap to calling these things theories rather than start with the idea that they're hypotheses? To your point about thought experiments, the beauty of this system is that it is a formal feature of it, that the fact that you are advancing an explanation for something and positing predictions that would come from that explanation has nothing to say about whether you believe it's true. Right? In fact, when you're working scientifically, the right thing to do is to generate as many hypotheses to explain an observation as you can, and then test to see which of them is correct, which means that you've simultaneously advanced mutually exclusive ideas. That's part of the nature of the work. And so if we simply brought the discipline of this hypothetico-deductive thinking to questions of conspiracy and collusion, we free ourselves from the madness that happens when, even voicing a conspiracy is now taken to be an embrace of it, and that is taken to be a sign of some sort of mental failure.